left, and these things that are radiocarbon's only reliable to like 50,000 years because the half-life of these things would decay maybe within 50, maybe 75. I'd have to look it up, but anyways, these things are supposedly millions of years old. We're still detecting through radiocarbon metrics in them discernible amounts of things that seem to make it seem like they're much younger than other people are saying that they are.
I just
But there, I mean, you can keep going on. There's tons of these types of things that don't fit neatly into this evolutionist narrative.
and I just want to something that Bach is saying that is correct is the fact that you're straw manning the way that paleontologists are like looking at the evidence that they have. They're not suiting a narrative that they fit to be true. Which I assume that you would think is just one that disproves God or creationist belief. They
No, it's
because
assuming
it's just
naturalism,
because that yeah sure assuming what they do is they look at the evidence because evolution wasn't really talked about or even discovered until like the 1850s, and some other guy said that fossils weren't found until the 1700s, and our belief in these things have changed and warped and developed over time. They are simply looking at the evidence that they have, and they are coming up with the best possible theory. And that's what it is. It's a theory. It changes all the time. It's not like they're just trying to because when you're saying that fits their narrative, it's like it's a real like you versus them mentality. It's
well,
like it's
but
like
it is, Bubba, because they don't come from a intellectually unadulterated place, right? They start with the position that naturalism is the only and the most reliable answer to explain these things. So when they're interpreting evidence, they assume naturalism, which denies categorically things like a divine creative decree. Okay, and so if it is the case that a divine creative decree is the explanation for how the world came to be, then their process that they employ is incapable of finding the truth of what actually took place in reality. It is only going to point to the truth if natural. No, of course not. I just
no.
brought that up as evidence.
Okay, evidence to what? That
And their
scientists have
conclusion
a
is wrong.
that scientists have a bias towards naturalism.
I'm saying it should be a sufficient challenge to their other presuppositions, right?
Sure,
So
it's
like, but
So the point,
instead, what you see them doing, they discover these things. It was like 10 years ago. It was big news at the time, but like they instead, what they do is they're coming up with and trying to generate theories as to how these things could have. Like they proposed like some like obscure stabilization of hemoglobin through iron nanoparticles or something like that, right? They're going to come up with a way to try to explain how these red blood cells could sustain inside of a fossil for 500 million, however, I don't actually remember how
yeah.
many hundreds of millions of years, but so like this is my point, right? Here is something that comes up that we have soft tissue preserved, uh, and now they're going to come up and try to figure out how to explain it away. They're going to come up with one. I'm not denying that
Sure,
at all.
and I think that this goes to something that I've been saying ever since day one that I joined the server. I think that the scientists, whatever they come up with, they are being academically honest with whatever they come up with. If they say that red blood cells came in for this way or that way or whatever the case, what they're simply doing is analyzing the data and they're coming to a conclusion, the last part of the scientific method, and the leap of faith that they
Yeah.
come to.
but still honest and
And
based on your will.
and sure,
Well,
and I'm sure
but I
that,
agree, dude.
and I think that yeah, straps and whatever you come up with for the reason that the red blood cells exist in the dinosaurs would be just as academically honest as far as your knowledge can reach, with
Well,
the data
this
that
is
you
my whole
have.
point. But this is my whole point, right? The point is there's not like some evidence that singularly supports one side or the other, or I don't believe there's any. There's evidence that exists, and then there's interpretations from that evidence that seem to drive towards a cohesive narrative.
Sure, and
And so the question is like, is that explanation strengthen their process so that when we look at evidence of things, if we want to be more unbiased, we should consider a broader interpretation of things, right? So here's a practical example that affects Christians a lot of times. They'll say the earth, you'll hear Christians say, the earth must be at least X billions of years old, and they'll calculate that based on like the light that it would take from the stars to arrive on Earth, right, from where they were, the speed of light over a certain period of time, their distance, etc. Ergo, the Earth must be, or the world must be this many millions of years old. Well, that's a fair assumption, right? Assuming that God, if God created the world, that God was then bound by some kind of naturalistic processes to allow that light to naturally arrive at the Earth, and He didn't create it to fit His intent, you know. But if it is the case in reality that God created a world and had intended within 500 years or something like that to have Abraham look up at the sky and see the stars, it would make sense that in reality God created the world with the light from the stars already established to fit his purpose. So, like, that constraint of naturalism is only a reliable indicator of reality if it is the case that that's what God did.
I have no response to that. Like, I agree. It was like,
Yeah. So again, like, I'm not criticizing these people and saying that they're like demonic, attacking God or something like that. What I'm saying is, like, when you're talking about evidence, we should recognize that this evidence is purely just an evidence. It's a point of data. The interpretation that you're believing about, that this is now evolution is a reliable means to explain how we arrived at this point in time and have the diversity of life that we see is on the basis of people that do assume naturalism.
yeah,
So it could be accurate. Maybe God did use evolutionary process to guide the existence of life or something like that. But it's not necessarily the case, nor is it the only narrative that the data actually supports.
I, yeah, and I don't want to be rude, but I feel like,
Funding sometimes whenever you take too strong of a narrative against it.
yeah, it's like if I were to look at the evidence of the Rami's mailbox, for example, and I were to say that it was formed there through a million-year process of evolution and wood carving and metalworking, and the aluminum just so happened to have paint on the side of it that says "Rami loves you," just so happened to form that way, then that would be a case of academic dishonesty, and I'm pretty sure everyone in the call would, if I were to present that case, then everyone in the call would hopefully flame me for it. But if I were to, but clearly I'm being academically dishonest or delusional. But the evidence that Rami put the mailbox there far outweighs the dad, I should say, far outweighs that Rami put it there than that he didn't put it there. And I think that that is the kid. What I'm getting at is the evidence that evolution really was the case and strict creationism is faulty is like the that the evolution outweighs creationism. And I'm more curious,
Well,
like,
yeah, and that's where we disagree, right? Because I think this is a common narrative, what you just described, right? And that's what started this whole conversation is that there is this idea because what that's why I started saying that, like, the evidence is the evidence. So, like, the mailbox thing, why I brought that up is because I'm trying to segment for you this idea that a theory exists, and a theory exists as something independent of the actual evidence in and of itself. Okay, the evidence is observable; it's empirical fact. All right, unless for some reason our senses are wrong or whatever. But assuming that those things are all true, the evidence is just purely the evidence. It's something that we can test and observe. But then we have a theory. So it's like we can come up with 100 probably viable theories for how that mailbox got there. But if our discernment or if what we're seeking to understand is what actually.
evidence that it's not true. Just
Well, no, that's not what I've said at all, right? The evidence that we observe, everything we observe about the universe, okay? So, for example, we observe the universe tending towards a state of entropy, right? We see the universe, everything we observe about the universe tells us that it was not created, or sorry, that it was not eternal, that it had an origin point, all right? And therefore, that origin point, to me, if we're
yep,
and even
deism.
even secular scientists would agree with this. If we're being academically honest, like you said, that means that there was an origin and there was a start of the universe. There was a source of those things. We also observe that matter is not created or destroyed in the universe. So this matter is not. We believe the universe is a closed system. The matter is not coming into the universe. So this matter that does exist inside this closed system of the universe must have come from somewhere, right? Again, it not being eternal as based on everything we see. So these are evidences and observances about the universe that we see that demand some kind of cause for the
Yeah,
things that we
as
observe.
what you're getting into is actually a conversation that I've probably already had with about half the people in this call, and I'm talking Grizzly, Bach, Noted, Nick, Peripheral, Rami. I've heard the logic. I agree that you can reason your way to deism. I'm talking just like, why is abiogenesis, for example, not true, and God
There's no
created us?
evidence of it.
I
We've
should,
never observed it. That's why. And what we do observe is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Okay. So, like, what I'm telling you, you've asked for evidence and observable things that demonstrate that there is a cause of all the things that are caused. And what I'm telling, and I've just given you observable things that science agrees with that demonstrate that there is a necessary cause
Yeah.
for the universe.
Yeah, that's for the
Now,
universe.
here's what scientists try to do, right? Scientists for the universe try to say something like, "Oh, there's all of these like cyclical models coming out now, right? Because not because there's any